What does it mean to identify as something? Do you have to identify as something you are? Can you identify as something you're not? That's what we'll explore in today's video. Hello, welcome to the Church of Agranari. I'm Shieldgenner7, disciple of Audacity. The truth of your identity is the domain of Audacity, the dear goddess of truth and nature. So let's say a prayer to her. Dear Audacity, thank you for your guidance and wisdom. Please help us reflect on ourselves and find who we are deep inside. End prayer. Alright, so what is an identity? What does it mean to identify as something? Do I have to be an artist to identify as one, for example? Your identity is part of who you are. It's something you would willingly label yourself as. When someone asks you, what are you? The answer to that question is your identity.
Big man in a suit of armor. Take that off, what are you?
Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
For example, if you say you're an artist, then artist is part of your identity. If you say American, then that means that being a resident of the United States is part of your identity. An identity can be more than one thing. For example, I identify as both a cyclist and a furry. They're both part of my identity. I'm also a man, as in human male, as in I fit the definition of man, but is that part of my identity? For me personally, it is not. But for some people, it is, and that's okay. But just because you fit the definition of something, does that mean it has to be part of your identity? No, it doesn't actually. For example, you know the word barbarian, right? Do you know the original definition? Originally, it just meant someone who spoke a language other than Greek. So, do you speak Greek? If not, then by definition, you are a barbarian. But do you identify as one? Probably not. Should you? Well, if you say you have to identify as something you fit the definition for, then yes, you do. And it also means you have to identify as other words you fit the definition for, including, for example, things like infidel, atheist, normie, and so on. There's a lot more words that you fit the definition for, like primate, animal, mammal, and so on. And do you have to include all those words too in your identity? Of course not. That would be absurd. Your identity is about what makes you personally you, regardless of what words you fit the definition for. So now we know that our identity does not have to include everything we are, but can it include things we're not? Me personally, I identify as a deer. Yes, the animal. And yes, I'm aware that in real life, I'm not physically a deer. But that doesn't matter, because it's still part of my identity. This question came up in the heyday of the brony fandom. People asked, what is a brony? And the obvious answer was someone who is a fan of the show My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. But what does that mean? Does it just mean people who engage with the fandom in meetups and online forums? Or can it just be someone who's watched the show even once? Where do you draw the line? If you say someone has to go to a brony convention at least once a year to be a brony, then you're automatically excluding lots of people from the community. If you say you have to have seen every episode, then you're excluding people who stopped watching when Starlight Glimmer became part of the main cast. Where do you draw the line? And what about the opposite? Can you force the label brony onto someone? Can you force someone who's watched the show front to back one time to be a brony? No. The easy answer is to say that whoever self-identifies as a brony is one. That's not to say that the definition of a brony is someone who identifies as one. The definition of a brony is still the same, except that you don't determine who is and who isn't one just by looking at someone. Only the person themselves can decide if they're one or not. They get to choose for themselves if they're a fan of the show enough to be a brony. And this goes for all the other fandoms too, not just this fandom in particular. So, someone who's only watched one episode could self-identify as a brony, and someone who's seen every episode and goes to conventions all the time could decide to not self-identify as a brony. It's all up to the person whether they want to or not, and whether it's part of their identity or not. So, when I say I identify as a deer, I know I don't actually fit the definition of one, but it still has meaning that I have that as part of my identity. It's more than just my favorite animal, it's part of my person, part of who I am. That's what an identity is. One relevant application of this is trans people. A trans person is someone who is born as one sex, but identifies as another. For example, a man who identifies as a woman. People are quick to point out that a man isn't a woman, and they're right, but they're missing the point. It doesn't matter if the woman is actually a man pretending to be a woman. They're a woman because they self-identify as one. And to treat them as a man, intentionally using the wrong pronouns, and denying them access to places women go, it's wrong. Yes, intentionally breaking someone's self-identity is wrong. It's like telling them that they're wrong for choosing what they self-identify as. It's saying they're wrong for being who they are, that their existence, their very sense of self, is wrong. It's wrong to do that. It's wrong to tell someone their identity is wrong. Only they can decide for themselves what they identify as and what their identity is. And that's not to mention, identities and realities can change. Someone could identify as something before they fit the definition of it, and someone can fit the definition of something before it becomes part of their identity. Going back to the trans example, a man can identify as a woman and then later become a woman. And going back to the artist example, someone can be doing art for a long time before officially self-identifying as an artist. Imposter syndrome is real, y'all. And identities, can they change? Yes. People change their identities all the time. For example, when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up? Did you end up becoming that when you became an adult? I think for most of us, the answer is no. For me, I wanted to be a paleontologist because I was super into dinosaurs back then. So you could say that paleontologist used to be part of my identity. But when I grew up, I wanted to do computer stuff, so I became a software developer, and software developer became part of my identity. Another example is religion. A lot of atheists out there grew up in the Christian faith. I was one of them. I used to identify as a Christian and was very devout in my faith. Now, I no longer identify as a Christian, despite the fact I still have some of my old habits from those days. Now, I fit the definition of an atheist, but it's not part of my identity. Why? Because I personally don't define myself by what I'm not. It's okay if you choose to, though. It's just not what I do. So, a person can change their identity. Most people have changed their identity at least once or twice in their life. It's a pretty normal thing to do over the course of your life. But changing identity can be hard. For me, the most difficult transition was when I lost my faith. My identity was so wrapped up in being a Christian that it was very painful to lose it. Losing part of your identity is like losing a part of yourself, and it hurts. And it can cause problems for you. For example, in Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, minor spoilers by the way, Puss in Boots was going to get married to Kitty Softpaws, but the thing was that part of Puss in Boots' identity was as a lone folk hero, and getting married contradicted the lone part. So instead of getting married, he chose his own ego, he chose to preserve his own sense of self, and he skipped the wedding. Through the course of the movie, his sense of self got shattered, and he built up a new sense of self with his friends, Kitty Softpaws and Perrito. Now, getting together with Kitty Softpaws was easier for him because he no longer had lone folk hero as part of his identity. So because his identity had changed over the course of the movie, it was now easier for him to get together with her. Ego is another word for sense of self or identity. People usually use this word when referring to a broken ego or someone who has too much ego, etc. And usually it's used to describe someone who has part of their identity wrapped up in being the best at something or being better than others, and that's why it's usually seen as a bad thing. But in reality, everyone has an ego, they all have a sense of self, and we all don't want to break our own sense of self, and we don't want others to break it either. And as a reminder, intentionally breaking someone's ego is rude and wrong. Like, for example, if you walk up to me and tell me, you're not a deer, you would be factually correct, but you'd also be very rude. There's no other reason to tell me that than to break my ego, and that's very rude and mean. It's not constructive, and it doesn't build trust. It's wrong. But it is polite and respectful to honor other people's sense of self. So, in conclusion, what is an identity? It's whatever you choose to self-identify as. Do you have to self-identify as something just because you are that something? No, you don't have to. Can you self-identify as something you're not? Yes. Yes, you can. Can your identity change? Yes. Yes, it can. Should you respect what other people self-identify as? Yes. Yes, you should. All right. We've heard from Audacity on this topic. Now let's hear what the other gods have to say. Alpha, wolf god of the loyal moon, he says you should stay true to who you are and not change your identity just because someone else tells you to. Ajig, cat god of happiness and peace, he says your identity should be made up of things that make you happy. Choose positive things, not negative things. Abrazo, bear god of compassion and love, he says find a community of people who also self-identify as the things you do. Absino, beaver god of hard work and rest, if you self-identify as something you're not, work hard to become that thing. Ayu, peacock god of perfection and beauty, make sure that your self-identity perfectly describes you. Spider Goddess of Safety. Hide your self-identity from strangers. Anonymity. Queen Terra, Ant Goddess of Communication and Cooperation. Properly communicate your self-identity to others when describing yourself. And of course, there's tons more to say, but that's all the time we have for today. So that's some stuff about identities. Are you aware of what you self-identify as? Let's say a prayer to Audacity. Dear Audacity, please help us look deep within ourselves and find who we truly are. Give us the courage to admit who we are, not just to ourselves, but to our loved ones as well. May they accept us for who we are, and please give us the understanding to help us accept who they are too, so that we may draw ever closer in our bonds to each other. End prayer. Today's recommended song is Who Am I by Casting Crowns. It's a song I listened to back when I was a Christian, and I still find it comforting today. Besides its main meaning, it can be interpreted as someone still being true to the core of who they are, despite their identity changing throughout their whole lifetime. And that's all for today. What do you self-identify as? If you're comfortable sharing, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Have a good week. And someone can fit the definition of something before it becomes part of their definition.